Hello again YouTube, Rambo to Base here. I just wanted to take a few minutes to go through this, the Tyranid Codex in relation to the 6th edition rules. I'm just going to quickly go through the units and say which units I think are worth taking, which units I think are probably better left well alone. And this is just my own opinion, so you know, if you've got other units that you run that work for you, then hey, if it ain't broke, don't try to fix it. So just go straight to the reference at the back of the book. So the first model you got is a Hive Tyrant. Now I really like Hive Tyrants, I think they're really useful. I especially like the new rules that make them, you know, flying creatures, that make them quite gnarly to take out. So the two setups that I usually use with my Hive Tyrant are the standard setup that it comes with a Lash Whip and a Bone Sword and a pair of Scythe and Talons. And then the second setup that I usually use is with two sets of Twin Link Devourers, so you've got the 12 shots from your 18-inch Devourer guns. Now there's two ways that you can run him. You can either give him wings, and both setups work quite well with wings because you can get across the board quite quick, and then your next turn you can get into a fight. Or if you give him the Devourers, you can just fly around the whole game shooting things. It works pretty sweet. And then the other way you can set him up is you could give him an armoured shell and just have him as a walking monster. But if you're going to do that, I would probably give him a few Tyrant Guard, just to bulk up his wounds a bit. And if you've got the points to spare, I would probably give the Tyrant Guard Lash Whips as well, especially if the Tyrant's got a Lash Whip, because then you've got one real gnarly unit that if anything gets to, it's just going to destroy straight away. It's a really useful model, but because it's only got 4 wounds, it does tend to die quite easily if you're not very clever with it. So good, but slightly fragile if you're not careful. The next is the Swarm Lord. Now I really like the Swarm Lord as well. I like a lot of the rules for him, but I do think he's quite expensive. Again, if you're going to run him, you probably want to give him a couple of Tyrant Guard, and again, give them Lash Whips. But if you do take him, he's an absolute monster and he will do a lot of damage. I generally would only take him in games of sort of 2,000 points plus really, just because he's so many points. But I have used him once in a 1,000-point game and he just dominated the board. He absolutely wiped out the army he was facing. So yeah, Swarm Lord, really useful, cool model. Tervigon. Now I think Tervigons should be in every Tyranid army. If you haven't got any, go out and buy some. I've got 3 and I think they work really well. I don't generally take them as the HQ section. I'll buy some gaunts and make them troops because I just think it's a lot more useful to have you know, monstrous creatures that are troop choices, because if they get onto an objective, they're going to be really hard to get off that objective. Plus the fact that they can keep spawning small units, so you know, if you're getting into the later part of the game, you can run the big guy to another objective and keep the spawned units hidden in cover, or vice versa. I won't talk about what upgrades to give him because I'll leave it down to you guys. Tyranid Primes I think are really useful, especially because they're independent characters, so you can hide them in big units of gaunts, and it's the cheapest HQ choice available. So you know, this guy's cheaper than a Space Marine Captain, so it's a useful thing to take because then you can spend a few points on upgrading him and you've still got a really cheap HQ, and it's not such a point sink as a Hive Tyrant that's going to get killed at some point in the game, and look, you know, if you're not lucky. Yeah, Tyranid Primes, really useful. The Parasite of Mortrex, I don't even know what this model's about, honestly. I've never taken it, I've never even tried it. It seems really mixed up to me, and I just don't like the idea of it at all. There's no model for it, which, being as though this codex has been out for, I'm sure it's 2009, so you know, it's been out for 3 years now. It's just, that just doesn't make any sense to me, honestly. If anybody's been using the Parasite of Mortrex effectively, please let me know how to use it and maybe I'll give it a whirl. Onto your elite section. The Hive Guard are, yes, everybody go and buy lots of Hive Guard. Now I was quite lucky that I managed to get all my Hive Guard made out of metal, but this is probably one of the models that you wouldn't mind having as a fine cast model, just because it's one big lumpy piece, so there's no small little bits to snap off it. Rules wise, it really works. It's toughness 6, so it's hard as anything, like hard as all your monstrous creatures. Really worthwhile unit getting. Lictors next. Lictors, man, what a disappointment they are. I used to take Lictors all the time. Really used to like just dropping them in. They used to be able to assault the turn they arrived in the last codex, and it was good at just taking out like a little scout squad or a devastator squad that are just pissing you off in the background. But now, I mean, you've got that what is it? It's like a teleport homer type thing on them, so you can deep strike within 6 inches without scattering. And they had +1 to your reserve rolls, but that's, you know, for 65 points, you're really better off spending your points elsewhere. I think Lictors are just on the shelf these days, collecting dust. The Death Leaper is a really cool model. I like the idea of it. I especially like using it in situations where you know you're going to be facing an enemy that takes Psychers, like an Eldar army or something like that. Especially against Space Wolves with the Gnarl Stormcaller, I think he's called, because if you can use the Death Leaper to reduce your enemy's leadership by like 3, you know, at its best, that will make them taking psychic tests a lot harder. So I think it's a really useful model for that specific purpose, but it's 140 points, so in smaller games I really don't think you want to be taking a Death Leaper. I would use one in Apocalypse games maybe, just as a little kind of up yours to your opponent. But other than that, I'd probably leave it out of anything less than 2,000 points. Venomthropes are really quite useful, or used to be quite useful in the old rules. Now that monstrous creatures only really need to be 25% in cover to get a 5+ cover save, they're probably not as useful unless you're just going to run your monsters up the board blindly, not even taking cover into consideration. One thing that really annoys me about Venomthropes now is that they're fine cast. Now, I haven't actually seen any of these models, but I've got some of the metal ones, and I can't imagine that they're going to work in fine cast because they've got such thin parts on them that every time you put them in your case and close your case, you're just going to hear bits snapping off them, and you're going to have to spend 20 minutes every time you get them out trying to glue these tiny little thin bits back together. If anybody's got one that's fine cast, let me know how it works, because, you know, I've just looked at that and thought, what have they done there? Why have they done that? But in the new rules, I would probably leave them out of my army. Again, I'd just take them in big Apocalypse games, and what I'd probably do is run them behind a Titan or something, just so your Titan gets a 5+ cover save, which would just be like, you know, if you get a las cannon into your Titan, you get a cover save over it. Zoanthropes. Love Zoanthropes, used to take them all the time. Now, with the fact that you don't get any kind of save against Perils of the Warp, you don't even get an invulnerable save, they seem like a bit of a lesser option for me now, because, you know, you got to roll your psychic test to get the power to go off, and then your enemy gets to deny the witch now against it, which is an extra like, oh no. Then you've got to roll to hit, and then you've got to roll to armor pen. You know what I mean? If you do actually get there, you've got a much better chance now of actually blowing it up, with the fact that AP1 weapons are +2 on the damage chart. But I think they've kind of got a little bit worse, for me personally, because I always seem to roll Perils of the Warp. It's just something that happens to me constantly. I guess I'm just unlucky. The Doom of Malantai, never tried it. Isn't a model for it. The rules for it seem quite interesting, and I've seen people using it and it's worked really well for them, but it seems to me that you know, the way that the game's gone now, you already need a pen and paper next to you, writing down what your warlord trait is, what this is, what your, you know, your psychic powers, blah blah blah, all this, that and the other, checking your hull points off and whatever. And this is just a model that needs that specifically, because every turn your toughness, no, your strength, sorry, is going up and down, and it's a bit, oh god, and it just seems like a bit of a complicated model to use. But that's not saying it's not good to use, because I have seen it used effectively, but it's just something that I wouldn't bother with, because out of all of the choices you've got on your elites, there are better ones to take. Next, Pyrovores. It's another one of them models that, you know, the actual model itself looks quite cool, but the rules for it seem so mixed up for me, it's unbelievable. It seems like they've tried to create an assault creature, because it's only got a short range weapon like the flame spurt, which is alright, you know, but then you've got to get it across the board, so to actually use it effectively, you've got to buy a drop pod for it, a drop spore, and it just seems to me a very mixed up model, because it's only toughness 4, so it's quite likely to just get killed immediately, even to like small arms fire, so I would just leave Pyrovores completely alone. Yumgal, Yamargal, whatever you want to call them, elite gene stealers. They're really expensive, but these guys work really well, especially if you're playing opponents that are just taking devastators with missile launchers or units at the back of the board that are just going to be firing at you the whole game. Sorry, you know, these guys work really well, especially now because they're one of the only units now that can actually assault on the turn they arrive. And I've FAQ'd this, and I've done some, you know, forum chats on it, and basically your codex supersedes the rules, and that still works for these guys. They can still assault the turn they arrive. The only downside to them is you're generally going to be assaulting in or through terrain, so you've got to weather a bit of fighting for your first turn, but it works all right because you just go on your first turn, if you're assaulting in terrain, go with the +1 toughness, and then your next turn go with either the +1 attack or +1 strength, and you hopefully just rip apart whatever's left of that that unit. So for me, out of the elite section, the only real models that I consider taking now are the Hive Guard, the Yamargal Gene Stealers, and maybe Zoanthropes. So let's move on to troops. Tyranid Warriors, I think they're pretty cool. I like the idea of them actually when the new codex came out. I wasn't too bothered that you couldn't take them as a HQ, was it elite? Yeah, you know, HQ, you used to be able to take them as a HQ or elite, but now they're troops. I think it works quite well. They're good for keeping like a synapse range in your army if you need to, and they get a lot of nice shots. The only downside being that the toughness 4, so if somebody lands like a Lehman Russ Pie template on you, the whole unit's going to get wiped out pretty quickly. If I take these guys, the way I run them personally is I give them a pair of bone swords and a death spitter. It makes them a bit expensive, but you know, they've got a lot of shots, and then if they get into a fight they can usually hold their own as well. I'd also probably either pay for adrenal glands or toxin sacs, but generally in the whole codex now I just lean towards toxin sacs than anything else. So yeah, they're pretty useful. But they're expensive now as well, man. They've gone up again. You get 3 of them for like nearly 30 quid. That's ridiculous. Gene Stealers, what a letdown now. What a letdown. It's such a shame what they've done to Gene Stealers, because Gene Stealers are probably statistically the ultimate shock troops in the game. You know, they're going to get there and they're going to kill you. But now they're probably just going to get shot to death before they even get there. They're quite expensive. The only real way I can see running them now is in a massive unit of like 20 or something like that, so you can weather some bullets. Don't really use the Broodlord that often, although I have got a couple. But yeah, I wouldn't worry about Gene Stealers. I would just take them in big silly games where you're playing like 5,000 points or something. You've just got a massive unit of Gene Stealers that are just going to go aha and hopefully get there, because you've got so much other stuff on the board coming across as well. Mycetic Spores are pretty cool. Bit of a letdown that there isn't actually a model for them, but they have their place. I use them quite often for all sorts of things really. If you want to stick some Zoanthropes in them, pop them down, blow up a tank, or use them as like a Carnifex delivery system if you want to use Carnifex if you haven't got anything else. So yeah, they're pretty cool. Termagants are, you know, everybody needs termagants in their army. If you're playing Tyranids, you've got termagants. That's just the way it goes now, isn't it? I've got about 140 of them, something like that, and I'd consider giving them an upgrade of either adrenal glands or toxin sacs. Again, I usually lean towards toxin sacs, and I'd run them in big units, so again, you can weather some bullets with them. Hormigants are wicked. I think Hormigants are great. I think I've got about 45 Hormigants, something like that. I again would give them the upgrade of toxin sacs, which makes them a bit expensive, but if you run them in a group of 15, with Toxin Sacks. I think that's 120 points, just off the top of my head. And they work really well. They get there, they do their job, and then they die usually. The good thing about Hormagaunts is the fact they're initiative 5, so they're going before a lot of units are going to go. I do think it would have been nice if you could have paid, I don't know, say 30 points on your Tervigon, and he could have spawned Hormagaunts instead of Termagants, because I probably would pay for that every time. But hey, that's just me wishing, isn't it? Ripper Swarms, don't really use them. I've got 11 or something, and I've got a load more in a box ready to put together. They're good as like a tie-up unit. You know, you throw them at some really badass unit, like some I don't know, Assault Terminators or some Thunderwolf Cavalry or something like that. And you know, they're just going to tie them up for ages. It's just a real piss-off unit. But you know, out of all the different options, it's not a unit that I would consider taking in a normal game. In a big game, maybe, yeah, but not in a normal game. So fast attack. Tyranid Shrieks. What to say about them? I like them. I like the idea of them. And again, I run them with bone swords, pair of bone swords, and scything talons. So they've got, like, you know, the rerolls to hit if you roll a 1. The one thing I don't really like about them is that they've only got a 5+ save, whereas the Tyranid Warrior's got a 4+ save. Now that to me makes these guys really quite easy to kill. The only real way that I think is effective to run them is by having a big unit in front of them as a meat shield, like gargoyles or something like that. If they get there, they do their job quite well, but it's getting there that's the problem. Oh, fucking hell, phone's ringing. Next we got Raveners. I have got some Raveners. I've never used them in the old rules. I've never used them in the new rules. The new models look kind of cool. That's about all I can say about Raveners. If anybody's got any Raveners and they run them and they've got any kind of really effective way that they use them, then I'd be really interested to hear that, just to maybe give it a go myself, because they're just models that I never use really. 30 points each, yeah, I just never use them. Sky Slasher Swarm Brood, so these are basically Ripper Swarms but with wings. I've never used them either. I don't believe there's any actual models for them unless you're going to buy the Forge World models. Again, they seem very much like Ripper Swarms. They're one of them units that you just want to get in there and tie somebody up with. But 15 points each, you know, they're going to get a bit expensive and you're going to be a bit disappointed when they get killed. So again, if anybody uses them effectively, I'd be really interested to hear what you've got to say about that. Gargoyles. I like gargoyles. They're pretty cool. Basically gaunts with wings. The only thing I don't like about them is the fact that you can't take them as a troop choice, which seems a bit silly to me. I've said it before, if you've got a Hive Tyrant with wings, I'd have thought you'd been able to take them as a troop choice. If they'd have done that, I'd have gone out and immediately bought like 10 boxes of them or something and be running an entire flying army. But they've got their place. They're pretty cool as like a meat shield. Yeah, they're nice models to use. I like the new plastic models, are awesome. I've got some of the metal ones as well, but they're a bit meh, you know. Next we've got a Harpy. Now, this guy just is another one of these things that I just don't know why they've even bothered putting it in the Codex, because there's no model. It's only toughness 5, so you know it's gonna get instant killed if it gets hit with a Demolisher cannon or something like that. And it's one of them things that just doesn't seem like a very good choice to me. If anybody's got one, again, feel free to let me know. Spore mine clusters, nah, you don't want to be running spore mine clusters in your army. Forget about it. Right, onto heavy support. We got the Carnifex. Now, I used to love Carnifexes. My entire army was full of Carnifexes back when you could make them elite choices as well. That would be gnarly if you could still do that. But you can't. Carnifexes are still good. They've got their place. They're strength 9. You know, they're going to rip a tank apart if they get there. You can stick them in a drop spore, but out of all your heavy support choices, you've got the Trigon, so why are you going to go with anything other than a Trigon? So Carnifex is good, useful. I tend to use them in big games, maybe a unit of 3 of them, just run them up the board, cycling around, taking wounds differently, but probably not in a competitive game. Old One Eye. Now there is a model for this, but it's about 40 years old as far as I can see. It looks rubbish. If you're going to use one, just buy a Carnifex and kit it out to look like old One Eye. It's 260 points. The rules are pretty good for it, but you know, are you going to be spending 260 points on one heavy support in like a 2,000 point army? You're not really, are you? Yeah, I'd leave that one alone, to be honest with you. Biovores, 45 points each. Biovores are pretty cool, especially now that the blast template is strength 4 large blast, whereas before you had all these faffy different mines you could take and blah blah blah. I've used them a few times. They worked especially well for me against Eldar and Guard, because the guys aren't getting a cover save if they're in these defense lines that you can buy now. They're just a bit fragile. If you haven't really hidden them very well, they're going to get shot, they're going to get outflanked and shot, and they're going to die. They're not really for fighting, but they're pretty cool. Trigons are basically the best heavy support choice as far as I can see. They've got 6 wounds, strength 6, toughness 6, you know, weapon skill 5. These guys are going to rip apart any unit that they get to, hopefully, bar some of the gnarlier ones. If I was going to take one, I'd be tempted to give him regeneration and probably toxin sacks. I would usually used to lean towards adrenal glands because it gives you the +1 initiative as well, so against marines and stuff you go first, but as that doesn't work now, I think toxin sacks is a better bet. I never usually upgrade them to Trigon Primes unless I'm playing big games, like massive apocalypse games, you know, 6,000 points or something. But yeah, they're a pretty cool unit. They are, as far as I can see, the best heavy support choice. Morlocks, 170 points. They are pretty good as well. I like the way that they pop up out the ground and destroy things. That's really cool for me. It's a bit hit and miss, but it's a fun way to play. I again wouldn't use one in anything other than a massive game as just an extra sort of scary unit to be popping up somewhere. But they've got their places. I'm sure there are people that run them in small armies. But for the points difference, for an extra, what is it, an extra 40 points or something, I would just buy a Trigon. You're much better off with a Trigon. The Tyranifex. Now this is one model that really confuses me. It's got the best armor save in the entire army as base, so it's got a 2+ armor save. Strength 6, toughness 6, and 6 wounds, so it's like as bad as a Trigon in that respect. But it's 250 points for one, and then for the gun that I would want to take on it, you've got to pay an extra 15 points, so it's 265 points. And it's only got 2 shots on this strength 10 gun, and it's only ballistic skill 3, so you know you're probably going to miss with one of them and hopefully do something with the other one. But in the 2 games that I've used one of these, they worked really well for the first half of the game, and then for the second half of the game did absolutely nothing. It was a really disappointing point sink. I'm not too keen on any of the other weapons just because they're quite close range short weapons, and this guy's going to have to start the game on your side of the board, so you're just going to have to keep running him up the board the whole game, and it doesn't seem like a very effective use of you know, 250+ points. So yeah, that's it. That's basically my run through of the Tyranid Codex in 6th edition. I hope that you've enjoyed my little take on it. If you've got anything to say, feel free to say it. If not, you know, just enjoy it, man.